Hey, here we go. Sorry I'm late, had some server issues here. Still having some server issues here.
Father Hines and his great band playing for you from the new Grand Terrace on Chicago's great South Side. Get ready now for 30 minutes of Super Jive in the Father Hines style. Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. Hey, Lorena and Kelly and Martin.
What could this be?
A little late today. Had a bit of server issues, but we should be all good now. Hey, Zap and Megler and Marie. Hey, Paula. Hey, Aviva. It is too damn hot for me. Hey, Sarah. Seems like all the air conditioning I can pump into the room is not getting it to a passable level. Because look real close to the background, you can see Charlotte in front of the window. Hey Rose, hey Gladys, hey Dave and Sunshine and Karen. Hey Kathleen. Hey Jordana. Hey Megan. Hey Bob. Thanks for coming out yesterday, Bob. Hey Vicky. Hey Susan. Hey Diane. Hey Joan. Down in Alabama. I've only got one of my air conditioners rigged up so far. I need to get the rest of them going. Because it is roasting in here. Charlotte is plopped down right in front of the air conditioner. Hey Eileen. Hey Jean. I thought it was raining last night. Turned out it was just that somebody had a sprinkler on. Hey Chris. Hey Bat. Morning Sue and Ava. Hey Lisa. Hey Vicky. Charlotte's pretty alert today. She's just relaxing. I'm not gonna lie, she's not well. Heather, really, basically, as soon as my business license paperwork goes through with the city. Right now, I can't do a tour that I would have to sell tickets to. I'm trying to find ways around that or get the paperwork pushed through. It's moved from pending zoning review to zoning review in progress, so that's progress. Hey, Susan. Hey, Audrey. Hey, Karen. Thanks, Diane. Thanks to everybody who came out yesterday, braving the heat. What I can do is, like, bonus ones for the Patreon people who've already been collecting tickets all year in some cases. Hey, Kathy. Hey, Bridget. And Bridget's mom. Morning, Nancy.
That's what you call a powerhouse donor. Yeah, Earl
Hey, Pepperana.
presents Leroy Harris to sing Teacher's Pet.
Thank you, Marie. Morning, Linda. Good morning, everybody and all around. Hey, David. Charlotte, you might be able to see Charlotte right now, just a little bit. She's curled up on the right in front of the window, on the window seat. Hey, Grace. She's been moving around quite a bit today. She's even talking a bit. Hey, Ellen. Thank you, Dina. Charlotte appreciates all of the feels. I'll say so on her behalf. She might be over there thinking, no I don't. Tell them to stay out of this. Hey, Bala. Hey, Angie. Hey, Timothy. Morning, John. Hey, Marjorie. Hey, James. James, you had a show last night, right? Hey, Heidi. Morning, Jay. I wouldn't say Charlotte keeps her thoughts to herself. She's a very talkative cat. You can have a conversation with her. Awesome, James. All right, we got some music all set up now for the time travel pub crawl on Thursday. More Lenora. Hey, Pamela. Hey, Geraldine. Mary, excellent idea. Morning, Ed. Morning, Sean in Bettendorf. Hey, Carol.
Give our faithful seat a slap and carry on in jive. Hi-ho, Silver!
Hey, Carol, and welcome home. Hey, Angie, Kathy. Hey, congrats on the new place, Sarah. You were talking about that last weekend. Hey, Ann. Yeah, I haven't really got into it, but no, Charlotte's not doing very well. But I might be delaying the morning mini tour tomorrow for about an hour. She's got a vet appointment. I don't want to get too into it. Morning, Randall. Hey, Judy. Hey, Donna. Hey, Kelly. Hey, Randall. Thanks, Tony. Good morning. Good morning, John. And Charlotte's curled up by the air conditioner right now. I think she was a little hot today. I wish she was doing her lie down and showing her tummy thing. Well, she still purrs. Mona, Ronnie recovered from the heat right away. Me, not so much. Gotta build a wall at Harlem Avenue to keep temperatures over 75 from coming into here. Thanks to all the good wishes for Charlotte. And congrats, Bridget. Hey, Georgia. Good morning. Hey, Linda. And Julie. Hey, Linda. A couple of Lindas in a row. Linda in Boston. Bob, the title of Ronnie's book is When the Stars Lead to You. Hey, Shelby. Hey, Luann. Georgia, it was. It's too hot for me when it's over 75, and yesterday was definitely over 75. We'll give it another minute or so before we get going. Morning, Kathy. Hey, Angie, I always tend to dress for, I'm wearing very thin pants and a poplin shirt. That's reasonably professional dress, but for summer there's just not much I can do. I'm glad to hear it, Suzanne. Hey, Eleanor, Carol, Aviva. Morning, Lynn. Hey, Paula. Adam, that's true. There's also Daughter of titles, a lot of those. After Twilight, Barnes & Noble was insisting on single-word titles with single iconic object covers.
Turn on now to the next two. Earl Father Hines gives us a bit of jive under the general heading of So Help Me.
Now, Vivian, Charlotte's not well. That's about all I'm saying. Bridget, yeah, you should definitely still make buttered rum pie. It's never a bad weather for buttered rum pie. Hey, Miles. Miles, don't scratch that. You know not to scratch that. I'll give it one more moment before I pause Father Earl Hines live at the Grand Terrace down in Bronzeville. Now a beauty shop, but still there. Miles. Miles here, everybody's saying good things for Charlotte. I want you to go carry him back to her, okay? You go let her know. Hey, Dad. But don't pounce on her. All right. I think it's time we get going over here. I got 10:04. That's well after usually time to start. So, all right, everybody, welcome along to Mysterious Chicago Tours. I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago. You guys want to see? You can see Charlotte back there just in front of the window just a little bit. But all right, welcome along. I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for about 15 years now. We've got about a dozen Chicago history books, including Mysterious Chicago, the book, Ghosts of Chicago, now a rare collector's item, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, and one that dips into Chicago a little bit, Abraham, The Ghosts of Lincoln, which was all taking these books, stories like, there's all these stories about Lincoln predicting his own death and haunting every place where he ever set foot and several places where he never set foot, and I tried to trace all of those back to the primary sources. And that was one thing that absolutely shocked me in the research, is how many Lincoln stories, how many interviews, how many first-hand accounts of him are buried in microfilm reels, and as near as I can tell, are never being cited anywhere. There's still stuff about Lincoln to find out. There are still mysteries out there to be solved, and that's one of my favorite things to do, is dig into these old historical mysteries, and of course we've got a lot of them here in Chicago. So this was one of the first virtual presentations that I did. I haven't done it in a few months now, so I've been trying to quick relearn stuff and add a couple of new bits. But let's go ahead and get started. I think there's one overarching mystery that goes up over all of Chicago, and that is, what the hell do we mean when we say Windy City? Most of the tours in town will tell you it's not really about the weather, it's about politicians being full of hot air when we were trying, sometimes they specifically cite when we were trying to get Chicago named as the World's Fair City in 1893. Now, really, it goes back quite a bit further than that, and in the early instances of it, nobody really says what the heck they were talking about. So every now and then, this is something I'm still working on. Every few months, I'll go into the various newspaper archives. I've subscribed to more of those than anybody would normally want, and just see if anything new has gotten scanned. Because new stuff gets scanned all the time. Like this is something from a Buffalo paper in 1867. Weston, his arrival and reception at Chicago, the Windy City in a state of excitement, incidents of the pedestrian's final march. This was a guy who was walking across the country in 1867, made quite a name for himself. So this is an early, but not exactly clear reference to the Windy City. Now, as far as we know, they actually were talking about the wind in some of these early ones. What is often cited is when Chicago was named a World's Fair City, Charles Anderson Dana, the New York newspaper publisher, fired off a really nasty editorial about Chicago that is often claimed to at least have popularized the term Windy City. Trouble with that is his editorial doesn't actually use the term Windy City at all, and also it had been going on for a long time. Now, the earliest reference people tend to pinpoint for this is in 1857. There was some talk about whether President Buchanan ought to be sending soldiers to Utah to fight against the Mormons. And down at the bottom of this here, where is it? Sorry, about 3 lines up, you can see 100 military officers from corporal to commander condemned to air their vanity and feathers only for the declaration of the boys and servant girls in this Windy City. Soldiers of the Army of Utah, 1,000 centuries command you to go to work. That will cool your valor. In other words, these kids nowadays don't want to go do any work. They just want to go live off of the military. So let's all go barmy, live off the Army, see the Utah we never saw. The thing is, though, it says this Windy City, not the Windy City. It was April when this came out, so might very well have just been a reference to the fact that it was windy in Chicago that week. We start seeing that reference more after the Civil War, like this one with Weston was back in 1867. That same month, 1867, we've got this particularly good one. According to the mood which they happen to be in, depending on the state of self-intoxication prevailing at the moment, the Chicagoanese claim anywhere from 250,000 to 1 million population. But some way it contrives always to be the fact that the the Windy City, when it holds an election, shows a wonderful scarcity of voters compared to the aggregate number of souls which it pretends to have in its keeping. Now, here we have a very specific reference to it being to windy meaning full of hot air. The way that it used to be sold back in the old days. It's not about the politicians in this case, it's just about us regular Chicagoans bragging about what our population was like. And that continued on. 1869, we've got this thing, Chicago wants to know what state it belongs to. The other day, while nearly all the members from Cook County, our county, were at home, a bill was introduced in the House of Representatives and passed, ceding the city of Chicago to Indiana and Wisconsin. Downstate would still probably have this kind of a vote and have it pass. The Windy City does not seem to be over popular in the Illinois legislature. Once again, it refers to us as a Windy City as though it were a nickname, but doesn't specify what the hell it's talking about. Throughout the 1870s, it became especially popular in Cincinnati newspapers, like this one here, Cincinnati Enquirer. The Chicago bosses transplanted Tweedism flourishing in the Windy City. But again, they don't talk about what they mean. So this is one of our ongoing mysteries, is what did early newspaper article writers in the 1860s mean when they started calling Chicago the Windy City? The closest ones that come to really addressing it says it was the people were really full of themselves and full of hot air, not necessarily the politicians. Sometimes you hear it referred to as the sports fans. Earliest one I can find here is just the population growth, but the way that they use it, it sounds as though it was already long in circulation. It's just one of those things that we'll have to figure out another day. But let's move on to a grave that we walked right by yesterday on the tour for the Patreons. By this time it was getting so hot that I had to hurry over to the Inez grave. But right back over here, this is the Hurlbut plot. Not to be confused with the Hulbert plot. That's Hulbert, this is Hurlbut. Which is kind of a funny thing to say anyway. But over here is Mr. Hurlbut's business partner, Barton Edsall. October 6th, 1871. Barton Edsall is found lying dead in the entryway of his North Side mansion. For 2 days, all anybody could talk about is how did Barton Edsall really die? Was it a murder? Was it a suicide? Did he accidentally shoot himself in the head? There were theories all around, but nothing really concrete. Finally, on the third day, he was buried here at Graceland Cemetery, and newspapers had published every word of the coroner's inquest. They brought in what passed for a ballistics expert in 1871, trying to figure out if the various bullet marks in the walls could have come from his gun or somebody else's gun. There was talks about him using his pistol to shoot at rats a couple of times recently. This was the Gold Coast. And talks about whether the medication he was taking for his toothaches and headaches might have driven him to temporary insanity. Now, eventually, the official cause in the Graceland interment book was accidental, but really, it wasn't quite finished. Nobody really quite figured out what had happened. So finally, on the third day, October 8th, he was buried here at Graceland Cemetery. Newspapers were still going to press that morning, saying, "We are still going to get to the bottom of this. We'll put out some reward money. We will not forget about Barton Edsall." But that night was the Great Chicago Fire, which wiped out Barton Edsall's house along with most of the rest of the city in the vicinity, except for his neighbor Marlon Ogden's house nearby. Everybody forgot about Barton Edsall completely. I think the Mysterious Chicago book might have been the first time he made it into a history book, almost 150 years later. That, of course, brings us to another one where it's one of those things where everybody thinks they know the answer, but really nobody does, is how did the Great Chicago Fire get started? Now, this is the O'Leary family cottage and barn as it looked around 1871 in a neighborhood that was sometimes referred to as Kansas. Exactly why they called it that, I've never quite determined for sure. But October 8th, 1871, a fire broke out on the second floor of this barn. Exactly what caused it is hard to tell. It should have just been a regular barn fire, the kind of thing that happened every day, but the fire ended up jumping across the river, then burning several miles north, destroying about 16,000 buildings. And for years, everybody was taught that dumb old Mrs. O'Leary left a kerosene lantern next to her cow. The cow kicked it over. That started the fire. That was fake news. That was spread around by Wilbur F. Story and the Chicago Times. He referred to her as a 70-year-old Irish hag and said that she had deliberately burned down the city because they were cutting off her pension. Now, there was, in fact, a Mrs. O'Leary, but she wasn't anywhere near 70 years old at the time. She was about 30, 35 years old. Certainly had never gotten a pension before. But they made a lot of talk about the cow there. Really was just an excuse for the Chicago Times to make fun of the Irish, which they absolutely loved doing in those days. But really, she wasn't nobody milked the cow at the hour that she did. There were a lot of other stories that went around over the years. She was very cleared of wrongdoing very, very quickly. We didn't formally pardon her until the 1990s, but really she had never been considered a major suspect by anybody who was really paying attention. But there were a number of things. The first guy to cite the fire was a neighbor named Pegleg Sullivan, whose story about where he was that night never totally added up. Years later, there was a story that a couple of kids had to confess to their priest right after the fire that they had snuck into that barn to steal milk from the cow to make whiskey punch and dropped a clay pipe, and that started the fire. And the priest told them, "I'm sure it was just an accident, boys," and then lectured them really good about becoming whiskey drinkers. Burning down the whole city, just an accident, but drinking whiskey, that's who your real problem is. Now, in the 18s, later on, a book came out called Ragnarok, The Age of Fire and Gravel by Ignatius Donnelly. What a name. Now, Ignatius Donnelly put forth the proposition that what really happened was that a meteor had crashed onto the city and started the fire. He also said that a previous meteor had crashed into the continent of Atlantis and destroyed that thousands of years before, which I think marks the first time anybody had ever claimed that Atlantis was a real place, not just a metaphor that Plato made up. So, I don't know if it's been on the History Channel or what, but all of a sudden in recent years, the meteor theory has gained a lot of traction. You can't really talk about the origins of the Great Chicago Fire without somebody bringing up the meteor theory. Now, scientists generally agree that a meteor would not really get quite hot enough that it could actually start a fire like this. There were other fires nearby. There was an even bigger one in Peshtigo, Wisconsin, that does sort of make it sound as though fire was raining down from above, but really it had just been a very dry year that year. If you look at the October 8th, 1871 morning newspapers, there's ads for fire insurance all over the place. Everybody knew that conditions were ripe for a good fire. So we're really never going to know what caused that flame to start up in Mrs. O'Leary's barn. My favorite explanation for it comes from her son, Big Jim O'Leary. Now, Big Jim O'Leary became a gambling kingpin years later. Usually it was said that you do not want to talk about this, the fire in front of Big Jim O'Leary if you value your life. But one day after that story about the clay pipe that the kids dropped went around in the papers, somebody tracked him down and said, would you like to clear this up for yourself? And he said, well, let me tell you first, that story about the lamp is the monumental fake of the last century. And then proceeded to say that what really happened was the green hay in their hayloft had spontaneously combusted. Which, my first thought is, spontaneous combustion, sure, but hay actually does spontaneously combust under certain circumstances. So that's about as good an explanation as we're likely to get. The trouble with it is that when all of this happened, Big Jim was like 2 years old. So not necessarily a greatly reliable witness. Now recently, a few people have been helping me try to get in to Big Jim O'Leary's mansion, which is still standing down on the south side. It is currently for sale, but the realtor is not responding to calls from people who want to tour around the place. I don't think he wants historians anywhere near it, because he's been really pushing the story that this was Mrs. O'Leary's mansion that her son built for her, kind of ignoring the fact that Mrs. O'Leary had been dead for 5 years by the time this place was built. They're also really pushing the idea that the tunnels down below were for his gambling operations, not for the servants to get around without anybody having to see them. But it is a really, really cool building. On the outside, you can see the JOL initials are still carved into there. And there is also this figurehead up here that is sometimes said to have been based on an actual image of Mrs. O'Leary, his mother. Now, this is the kind of face you see carved into walls quite a bit, but if that were true, this would be the closest thing we have to an authentic portrait of Mrs. O'Leary. So Mrs. O'Leary refused to sit for a picture. You see drawings and pictures of her all over the place, but they're just a guess as to what she might have looked like. They're just an artist's conception. Now, she ended up with a great disdain for the press after the Great Chicago Fire, for obvious reasons, and it is said that part of her revenge was refusing to sit for having a portrait painted. Now, I've never seen for sure whether that was actually true or not. I've never seen it firsthand from Big Jim or anything, but I suspect that's probably the situation. But the Chicago Times, which during the Civil War had been known for their phenomenal racism, though they did publish my favorite ad ever after we took Richmond back from the Confederates. Richmond has fallen, and so have our prices at Western Hall Clothing House. But just days after they said that it was Mrs. O'Leary, they published a thing saying that it was actually the Society Internationale, starting the fire on purpose because they were communists intent on destroying capitalism. Exactly as it came up in The Far Side. Years and years later. Now, their story was that the night before the fire, a guy named George Francis Train had been giving a speech at a nearby lecture hall. And in the course of that lecture, suddenly he stopped and said, "I can't say too much, but this is the last speech that will ever be made in this hall. Something terrible is going to happen." And then went back into his speech. For Train, it was said, was a member of the Society Internationale. Train was an interesting guy. That's a nice way to put it. He made a lot of political speeches. He would bust in the middle of his speeches to start making impromptu poems. Was way ahead of his time on certain issues, way behind his time on certain others. There's from 1861. Right when the United States was first seceding from, first dealing with the early days of the Civil War, he went out to the UK to make speeches instead. I just love this line here. "They are now in the rapids of the French Revolution, which they have created, and ere the reign of terror is over, they will make the fearful plunge and pass over the falls, where all the devils are holding a jubilee in hell, in that dark sepulchral dungeon of internal regions, especially reserved for traitors." And he had actually spoken at Farwell Hall right the day before the Great Chicago Fire. There's this terrific ad that was in the paper the day before. "George Francis Train will deliver his new lecture in Farwell Hall tonight." And then, "Treason. It has been ascertained that George Francis Train will seek to influence the minds of the public tonight. Loyal citizens are notified to be vigilant." This guy was way ahead of his time on certain things. He was a bit of a communist, for one thing. He was claimed off and on to be a member of the Society Internationale. Now, whether the story of him actually predicting the fire was true or not is the biggest mystery of them all. Usually when Train gave a speech, the next day they would be in the papers making fun of him a little bit. In this case, nobody wrote down what he was saying at the time. It just came around a while later. What he was doing at the time was making a speech in support of his independent bid for the presidency that would be coming up in 1872. There was this, he published a book of his speeches called The Man of Destiny, self-published under that title. Now, for some reason, the Man of Destiny campaign speech book doesn't really include his Chicago one, though there is a transcription of an interview where someone asks, "Is it true, Mr. Train, that you predicted the Great Chicago Fire?" And he's kind of like, I can imagine him looking aside as he said, "Who can explain this power I seem to have of predicting the future?" So, predicting the demise of Chicago was actually a part of his act. He believed that the polar ice caps were melting and that Lake Michigan was going to swallow up the city. Not so much that, I don't think it's so much that he really believed it, so much that he was investing heavily in Omaha. He thought that Omaha was going to be the next big city, and tearing down Chicago was just good for business. So, the Tribune, when the Tribune was asking about the story of him predicting the fire, they said that the real question is, where was he with all of that water he's been talking about this whole time? Speaking of water, let's go out to the Chicago River a bit. After working on the boats for years, it makes me hot just to be out, just to see this footage. But this is the Reed Murdoch building on the Chicago River. This was the site where the Eastland capsized back in 1915. Now, when that happened, about 844 people were killed, but that's not what we're here to talk about right now. One of the divers was a guy by the name of Frenchy Deneau, one of the divers who was tasked with trying to dredge the bodies up from out of the water. If I were him, I never would have set foot in the water again after this. He later claimed that he had dragged up about 200 bodies himself. I suspect he was probably exaggerating slightly, as he was known to do so. But the next month, or a couple of months later in November, he was back down in the river again, digging a trench down to lay some cables. And while he did, his shovel brush up against some kind of big metal thing. At first he thought it was an old part of the Eastland. Then he realized that what he had found was a 40-foot-long homemade submarine, which apparently had been down there for between 25 and 70 years, depending on whose theory you believe as to where it came from. Now, this was a 40-foot-long homemade submarine. It lacked a motor to move it forward, so apparently it had just sunk. So they raised it up the next month and announced that they had found a dead guy and a dead dog on board the thing. And they never figured out who the guy was or what in the world would possess him to take his dog out on a homemade submarine. Personally, I kind of suspect that Mr. Deneau probably was making up the part about the skulls, but they put it on display on South State Street. For a dime, you could see the submarine and the dead guy. And my favorite part of the ad for it is down at the bottom. There's this thing at the corner. Special for children. Groups of 10 or more kids were half off on Saturday mornings. So I always like to imagine some dude stationed outside going like, "Hey kid, you want to see a dead body? You got a nickel and 9 friends who also have nickels?" Now, exactly where this submarine came from is one of our great unsolved mysteries. There was a guy named Baker who had patented a submarine that looked kind of like it, but his is said to have been sunk out in Lake Michigan someplace when he was done experimenting with it. There are a couple of photographs of this one. It doesn't quite match, but it is probably still out in Lake Michigan someplace. There are actually quite a few Lake Michigan submarines out there. Somewhere up outside, off the coast of the north suburbs, is the UC-97, a captured World War I U-boat. Now, under the treaty terms, all of the captured vessels had to be sunk at a certain point. So they sunk this one out in the lake. It's still out there now. And they used the former Eastland to sink it. It actually fired what some people consider the first and the last shot of World War I. There's another mystery about the Fool Killer, and that's that we don't really know where the thing ended up. Most likely it got sold for scrap during World War I. But we don't really know. There's a newspaper ad saying that it was up for sale at one point in late 1916, but that's about it. Last known appearance was at Riverview Amusement Park in late 1916. After that, it disappears from the record. Probably sold for scrap, but for all we know, it could still be rotting away in somebody's garage to this day. But I've been saying that for years. It hasn't turned up just yet. I got a wild rumor that somebody thought they had found it at one point. They were just misinterpreting a TV show. But as we were going down this river footage here, let me go a little bit. Let me just fast forward it slightly. Now, back during the Great Chicago Fire for a minute there, the best way to get out of the loop was to go under the tunnel that would be underneath us right now under LaSalle Street. In those days, there wasn't a bridge at LaSalle Street yet. You had to take a tunnel that was dug out just before the Great Chicago Fire. And is still down there to this day. It's been full of damp sand since the 1950s, but it's still there. It's one of several mysterious tunnels that are still around Chicago someplace. Another is, this is a guy by the name of John Huck. John Huck was a brewer in Chicago who had about a mile of tunnels for cooling his beer in the summertime that were underneath the Gold Coast. And presumably are still there to this day, but nobody knows exactly where anymore. There's also underneath, this is a diagram of what it looked like underneath LaSalle Street. There was another one underneath Washington Street. Underneath the Congress Hotel, we think this would have been the entrance to what was called Peacock Alley, a tunnel between the Congress Hotel and the Auditorium Theater. For a while, the security guards and I there had a plan to get some pickaxes and bust into the thing. What would be behind that wall is one of those things that kind of haunts my dreams. And then, of course, there's the freight tunnels that are 40 feet down below the loop that used to be used for pushing coal and mail around. They're still down there, too, but they don't let anybody in anymore. But among things that haunt my dreams, though, the thing that comes up the most, the thing that I have so many dreams about busting into this place, is the Couch Tomb in Lincoln Park. I've had so many dreams about seeing what's on the inside of this place, and I can kind of picture what's in it. I know what the inside of mausoleums look like just fine. But there was a time in the 1840s and 1850s, up to about 1873, Lincoln Park was still a cemetery, even overlapping a couple of years when it had become the park. There had been a couple of smaller burial grounds around Chicago, but they decided, you know what we're going to do? We'll be progressive. We'll put aside a big patch of land to bury everybody in, and that means nobody will have to smell these disgusting graveyards. It'll be enough space that everybody gets their own grave. I'm even starting to suspect these really crowded, smelly ones aren't very good for sanitation. So they put aside 100 acres in what they thought would be the outskirts of the city for a long time. Didn't work for very long. Eventually they got worried that too many dead bodies were getting mixed into the drinking water, and over the course of the 1860s to about 1873, proceeded to move all of the bodies primarily to Graceland and Rose Hill. But right in the middle of the park, they never got around to moving the Ira Couch tomb. Now, there's a couple of mysteries here, too. The first is why they didn't move this one. Ira Couch was a hotel owner. He and his brother ran a place called the Tremont House at Dearborn and Lake. He died in 1857 while he was vacationing in Cuba. The next year, this mausoleum was built for him. He was probably interred in what was called a Fisk metallic burial case, these really ornate metal caskets with a viewing window over the face. And the most common story is the family objected to having the mausoleum moved. And that's probably a part of it. They're supposedly sued, though I've never been able to find the lawsuit paperwork. There's also a story that the city just found out it was going to cost $3,000 to move the thing, at least, because mausoleums are not easy to move, and just balked at the cost and decided, you know what, just plant some trees around it. The fact that Jim Couch was probably threatening to sue probably just made it more of an incentive. Just leave that one there. So, the bottom line is it was probably money, but nobody's exactly sure why they left this one here. Another is we don't know who all is in there to this day. As of 100 years ago, Ira's grandson said he thought there were about half a dozen people inside of the place. It was built to hold 12 or 13. It's either half empty or half full, depending on how you look at it. The city at the time said it was actually emptied years ago, and everybody had been moved to the new family plot at Rose Hill Cemetery. This is Ira's wife Carolyn's funeral receipt, which talks about her burial at Rose Hill, the cost of her casket, which was $80 in 1900 money, whereas Ira's was probably quite a bit more than that in 1850s money. But I've seen the lot record. There is a family plot with James Couch in it and with Carolyn Couch in it, and it's got Ira's name at Rose Hill Cemetery. But I've seen the lot record there. It doesn't say anything about them actually being moved. Now, a while ago, I was contacted by Ira's great-great-great-granddaughter, Rachel, who had boxes and boxes full of stuff. We had a great time digging through them, but it didn't include anything like a key to get inside of this place or anything. So for 100 years now, since at least 1911, people have been talking about why is this tomb still here? What's inside of it? Why can't we open it up? And occasionally a family member has talked about whether they should go through the red tape and try to open it up. But the family and the city have always had different opinions as to who exactly owns the thing and who would have the right to do so. They're also kind of afraid at this point they can't get it open without breaking the thing. So they added his name onto the tomb at Rose Hill. Whether that actually means he's there, really, it doesn't mean a thing. But here's what we know who was buried in that plot. The first one would have been an unknown child, then a woman named Abigail Wells, James' sister-in-law, Carolyn Couch, Ira's daughter, James Couch, his brother. Now, when James Couch died in 1892, there was some talk about whether they would put him in the old family tomb. They ended up going with the Rose Hill plot, and the story that went around years later was they found they couldn't get the old tomb open without dynamite. So it drives me crazy wondering what is inside of this place, but I do have some idea. So a few years back, I was taking a ghost tour group out here and noticed there was a crack under the door about the size of your pinky finger. So using some really high-tech equipment known as the Tomb Snooper 500, it's an iPhone taped to a wire hanger, I was able to get some footage of what's under the door. Just watch. Up and under we go. There it is, the inside of the tomb. And what you're looking at here is another door. So it's like I got past level 1, but not level 2. Now there's some kind of there is one school of thought that if we ever actually see behind the second door, it's just going to take all of the fun out of the thing. And I actually tend to believe that. But, next time there's a big derecho storm or something, I'm always, watching Twitter very carefully to make sure that the thing hasn't been knocked over. Move up a little bit in history. Yesterday, and on most of my Graceland tours, we end up at the Marshall Field Jr. grave, part of the Marshall Field family plot. This massive mansion on Prairie Avenue was Marshall Field Jr.'s house, the son of the merchant prince of Chicago, as pictured right here. Now, Marshall Field Jr., this place is now 6 really spacious townhouses. He initially had this place all to himself. But one day in 1905, a butler found him lying, bleeding of a gunshot wound to the abdomen. So they hustled him to the hospital, though bizarrely did not inform the police about it for quite a while. After the story leaked out, it was Marshall Field himself was out of town, but ran what they call a death race to save son, Really, there was nothing he could do to save him. He was just trying to get back to Chicago where his son was in the hospital. But you'll notice here it says, shot in mystery. Now, Field had made it clear through his associates that any newspaper that said that there was any mystery about this, that it wasn't just an accident, that it might have been a suicide or a murder, could count on never getting any advertisement from Marshall Field again. That was a big advertiser. But the Chicago American already didn't get any advertising from Marshall Field, so they decided they could just publish what they wanted to, which was the major rumor that Marshall Field Jr. had actually been in the Everleigh Club, which of all of the houses of ill repute in the city was the one with the best reputation. This is the one where all of the robber barons and rich people went. It cost something like the equivalent of about $1,500 a night just to set foot in the place, or if you spent less than that, you would be asked never to come back again. So the rumor was that he had gone inside of this place, into one of the rooms that might have looked like this one, and got into a fight, ended up being shot, and then transported back to his house, partly to save him the embarrassment of having been shot in a brothel, but also to save the good name of the Everleigh Club. They didn't want a reputation as being the kind of place where people got shot. So he died shortly thereafter. According to a couple of reports, he regained consciousness and said he didn't remember what was happening. But it's one of those things that everybody had a story about it, and for years afterwards, you would hear stories about people saying, I was the last person who saw him, I saw him going to the Everleigh Club, I know what really happened that day. In fact, there was a guy named William Earl Dodge Stokes who built the Ansonia Hotel in New York. Now, in the 1920s, he went through a very public divorce, and over the course of that divorce, he went all around the place. He had gotten into his head that his now ex-wife was originally a butterfly, one of the workers at the Everleigh Club. So he went back to the old building and interviewed the caretaker and said that the caretaker pointed to a vase and said, if that vase could talk, it would tell you what really happened to Marshall Field Jr. How this person would have known herself is anybody's guess. Whether Stokes was even telling the truth, once again, I find it a little bit unlikely. His story got wilder and wilder as things went. Now, it's kind of odd to think that this guy lived really walking distance away from that club. The Millionaire District and the Red Light District were right next to each other in those days. And also, before you got there, and you might even be able to see where the Everleigh was in the background of this shot briefly. And we just covered this guy a week ago, so I won't go too into it. But you see these circular towers back there behind the White Castle. That's where the Everleigh would have been. We're on Wabash here, just above Cermak. This space right here was where Big Jim Colosimo's cafe was. Big Jim Colosimo was the vice lord of Chicago in the 1910s until just after Prohibition started, he was shot down. And having been shot down by an unknown assailant, he was put into his mausoleum. We just did this last week, but I got to do it again. While we're tomb snooping. One of those other mysteries is the number on the slab here. It says that he died in 1919. He died in 1920. So, one of those typos. But it was generally, reporters have occasionally been known to say that everybody in town knew who the shooter was, but they never actually let slip who it was. So it becomes one of those many unsolved mysteries of the era. I'm running a little lower on time today. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here over a couple of these, just because I got this wonderful shot. Here's a little bit of the lake off of Rogers Park. Gorgeous view early one morning. Also, if you look way up, this is about where the UC-97 would have been sunk by the Eastland back in after World War I. But off of the coast, back in 1893, there was a sighting of the Lake Michigan sea serpent, which is something that they talked about in the papers in Chicago for about the course of a half a century, from the late 19th through early 20th century. Earliest reference I've seen is 1867. There was a story about a monster showing up in Lake Michigan. Not unlike the Loch Ness Monster, though not nearly so well publicized. There was this one of it from 1867. 1893, there was even a drawing of it, how it looked. Kind of the head of a horse, body of a snake thing. It came up again as late as 1934. Now, the way that they describe it here with that head of a horse reminds me of Agopago, the mystery monster of Canada. And the lake that he appears in, there's even a statue underwater that they put there that I got to admit would scare the heck out of me. But every now and then we do have more traditional mysteries like this. I shouldn't say traditional, but the kind that I used to read about when I was a kid. Sea monsters, Bigfoot, UFOs. And our earliest UFO sighting in Chicago, in fact, goes back to just about the same section of the lake. Around the turn of the 20th century, there was a whole rash of sightings of airships around the country. This is a drawing of how it looked flying over Rogers Park. And it kind of resembles a blimp in some drawings, or sometimes they would describe it as like a flying cigar. You know, unidentified flying cupcakes, yellow submarines, blue meanies. Well, this appeared all over the country. It was there's never really been a good explanation for what it was. Some people just go towards mass hysteria. Other people say it was something like swamp gas, that classic explanation for UFOs. But it was ahead of any aerial technology that people really knew about at the time, and it was reported all over the place. But this, of course, continues even now. Just about 15 years ago, there was this big story about a UFO at O'Hare. And there's a terrific report. If you dig around, you can find the NARCAP report of an unidentified aerial phenomenon and its safety implications at O'Hare Airport, November 7th, 2006. It's a really interesting report. It has all of these transcripts from things like from what was going on in the pilot's tower, and like radioing back to air traffic control saying, I don't know if we should even say this. I promise you guys we haven't been drinking. But do you see a big flying disc flying up above D-Dates here? And it was a big topic of conversation among the airport for about a day. But then quickly they started having a big rule about not talking about it. Eventually they put out an explanation saying it was what was called a hole punch cloud, which didn't really satisfy much of anybody. And it wasn't really much better than saying it was swamp gas in an area that wasn't swamp. Now this doesn't mean it was a space alien or anything. There's any number of other explanations beyond that, but it was weird how much they just tried to hush it up. As one airport employee said, if a weird bag goes through, all hell breaks loose. But if we have a flying disc seen flying 500 feet over D-Gates, everyone's like, don't talk about it, don't talk about it. Though one airport official had a pretty good line. He said, look, you don't fly over here across light years of space and then turn back around because your gate is occupied. Good point there. And now we'll move back into history a little bit more. Right up there is the Auditorium Theater, connected via tunnel to the old Congress Hotel. Now, in that building, back in 1904, there was a car rental garage run by a guy named Dan Canary. And one day, Mr. Canary rented a car and chauffeur to a guy answering only to the name of Mr. Dove, who the next morning they found the car out in Lamont, out in the suburbs, halfway to Joliet. The driver, Mr. Bates, had been shot, and Mr. Dove was nowhere to be found. And this is a bit of a surprise. It was nobody had ever been murdered in an automobile before. It was one of Chicago's more dubious firsts, or more infamous firsts. But he was traced back to the Annex. That's what they called the Congress Hotel in those days. And the Chicago American, a really fun paper to read, though certainly not the most reliable, even recreated the entire thing. This must have been what it looked like when Mr. Dove was sitting in the back of the car and shot Mr. Bate, who then slumped over the steering wheel. For a while, there was even a claim that Mr. Dove was Joseph Wilde, known as Yellow Kid Wilde, one of our bigger con artists in Chicago. But they couldn't come up with anything here. Who was Mr. Dove? What would his motive have been? The best explanation, the most convincing explanation people could think up was they got all the way out to Lamont, and then Mr. Dove says, by the way, I can't pay you. At which point Mr. Bates said, then you have to get out of the car, or I'm just going to turn this thing right back around. At which point Mr. Dove shot him and ran away. But about the only clue was just the slip, Dove, Auditorium Hotel, available at once. Now, what they were even doing, he only rented the thing for a couple of hours. They were all the way out in Lamont. It would have been way beyond where he was supposed to have been able to go. So they came up with all kinds of theories. 6 theories advanced by police. Murdered in revenge, murdered because of his persistence in collecting the fare, murdered because he knew too much. There was a farmer who heard the ruckus, came to testify at the trial, but he couldn't say much. There were some love letters in Mr. Bates' pocket. Now, we can say what we will about the Chicago American. They were absolutely a tabloid, But, like a lot of tabloids, they also had good investigative journalism in those days. They also brought in people like Mary E. Holland, who is sometimes referred to as Chicago's woman Sherlock Holmes. She was a fingerprint expert a decade before fingerprints were actually being used. She analyzed the car and believed that there was a third person in the automobile with them. What became of that, or if that person had been killed and then the body successfully hidden, impossible to know. She pops up in surprising places in Chicago Unsolved Mystery investigations, including one that I just covered the other night. I'll cover in a little more detail here. But we'll go out beyond my usual jurisdiction and all the way to the far west suburbs to Aurora, Illinois, home of Wayne and Garth. And then we'll just do a street view version of this. I was kind of glad I didn't drive an hour and a half out to do a find a grave here. Hour 15, hour and a half. As it turned out, the grave that in question could be found on Google Street Views, right below me right now. There's one with the cross on top. This one with the cross at a large view would be the grave of a woman named Teresa Hollander. Now, Teresa Hollander isn't just buried here. She also died here in the cemetery, in St. Nicholas Cemetery in Aurora. One grim morning in 1914, she was found having been clubbed to death after a terrific struggle with what appeared to be a very large man somewhere in the cemetery. So she died here, was buried here. Suspicion fell on an ex-boyfriend named Anthony Petrus, shown here with his wife. The story goes that he was the classic jilted ex-boyfriend who decided to kill her out here. Ended up on trial twice, despite the fact that Chicago's woman Sherlock Holmes, Mary E. Holland, strongly believed that they should be looking at other people first. She was brought in for this one as well. It was still a couple of years before, well, it was really that same year fingerprints would first be used in court in the United States, and she would testify at that particular trial. But she analyzed everything about it and came up with 20 reasons that indicated that Petrus was not guilty. And some of these wouldn't really hold up. It's just like he doesn't seem like the criminal type to me. He was able to work that day at his job, and it's a complicated job. If he'd been contemplating murder, surely he wouldn't have been able to concentrate. That stuff doesn't really hold up, but the fact that the fingerprints found, the bloody fingerprints, were not his, probably would hold up. And the story about him being a jilted ex-boyfriend was clearly not true. They had dated for a while, but he clearly did not want to marry Teresa. Teresa's father had offered him a furnished house if he would marry his daughter. He refused and went off and married somebody else instead. He was put on trial the first time, and one lone juror was insisting on convicting, where everybody else wanted to acquit, so it became a mistrial. The second trial, he was quickly acquitted by all of the jurors. So this became one of those unsolved mysteries. Who killed Teresa Holland and why? And the fact that it might have just been somebody killing because they had some sort of deep inner need to do so hadn't really occurred to people yet. The phenomenon that we now call a serial killer was still really fairly new. Now, in one of the more bizarre aspects of the case, the state's attorney took a very close-up photograph of Teresa's eyeball as her corpse lay on the slab, based on an old belief that perhaps the retina had retained an image of the last thing that she looked at, which in this case would have been the murderer. So the sheriff thought that whole aspect was horribly embarrassing. He said they debunked that kind of thing years and years ago. An oculist that was consulted by the press said theoretically that might be possible, but you would need a camera that covers all the broad spectrum of color. You can't get a camera like that in Aurora, Illinois. You might be able to now, but even then I still don't think the science would exactly hold up. So, shortly after Petrus was acquitted, and really all the time that he was on trial, the murderer struck again. Presumably the same murderer anyway. A woman named Jenny Miller was killed not far from here with a wrench. Emma Peterson not long after that. So this is a case that we can refer to now as the Aurora Ripper, a weirdly forgotten story. There were 3 known victims plus a few others who were attacked but were able to run away. Now, it's one of them I'm trying to dig into a bit more right now. It's remarkable, like the Aurora papers from 1914 aren't really digitized, which makes it a little bit tricky right now. But places are starting to open back up. So hopefully I will be able to get back into the microfilm rooms really soon. I'm really itching to get back into the microfilm rooms at this point. But I have now run over time, And I am just roasting hot in here anyway. So quick plug for the upcoming virtual tours. Thursday night we are bringing back time travel pub crawls. We haven't done one of those since like St. Patrick's Day. It's been more than 2 months, but we're bringing back another one. It's kind of on short notice, but I'm trying to cobble a really cool one together. For those of you new around here, when we do virtual tours, I started figuring about a year ago, hey, we should do a pub crawl too. Then realized, hey, if it's virtual, we're not bound by time or space. We've been to some of the places we talked about today, like the Everlake Club, in fact. Then next Sunday, bringing back Gold Coast Tales, one of my favorite recent ones that we did back in March. It's been about 10 weeks. That's about the time when I want to start bringing that up again. And mini tours on Facebook come up every day, including tomorrow will be Mural Monday. There's a possibility I might be doing it at 11 instead of 10, just kind of check local listings. I'll try to put up a post about it anyway. And then Fridays are Find a Grave Friday. We're going to be on the road in a couple of weeks, so I've got a far-flung one in mind that I'm super excited about. And on Fridays at 6:30 on the Patty Vasquez Show Facebook page, we do a show called Whiskey and a Cookie, in which Patty and friends, including myself, drink whiskey, eat cookies, and discuss the events of the week. Now, should you need a Mysterious Chicago sweatshirt, hoodie, etc., cafepress.com/mysteriouschicago has got you covered. I'm working on a couple of new designs to go up there shortly, but for now, you can get the Mysterious Chicago logo on pretty much anything. So cool to see so many people wearing this stuff yesterday when we did the Graceland tour for the Patreon members. And with that, everybody, thanks a lot for joining me today. I'm Adam Seltzer for Mysterious Chicago Tours. We'll put Earl Father Hines back on and just hang out like we always do. So thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago. Thanks, Mary. Local fountains, that sounds cool. So the trick is a lot of them aren't turned on yet till after Labor Day. And I never know till I get there. Nelda, I'm sure Miles will be back in a minute. Well, Miles is just sitting over in the window right now. I got a window cracked open for him, which isn't great for keeping the place cool with the air conditioner, but he loves it. What can I do? And Charlotte likes the windows, too. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Michael. Thank you, Carolyn. Sorry to hear that, Kathy. Oh, thanks, Jacqueline. Yeah, it's a bit of a long commute for me to get clear out to Aurora, but it's pretty easy to find that grave. I could do it on Street Views. I think that's a first for me. The other known victims are fairly nearby. There's one in like Spring Lake and one in Riverside. Thanks, Georgia. Thanks for posting the link there, Patty. Patty does lots of cool live streams. Thanks, Demita. Yeah, the Lake Michigan Sea Monster is not one of our better known ones, but it comes up.
Well, we're about halfway through this jive concert by Earl Father Hines and his orchestra, so now it can be told it's reaching you from the new Grand Terrace on Chicago's south side.
Now, Wendy, I'm working on some ideas for new logos on Cafe Press, but we'll see. And yes, we are back on PayPal. I've somehow convinced them that no, I am not a gambling kingpin after all. Still working on Venmo, but any day now we should hear from them. And frankly, at this point, I'd rather hear from the city saying, yes, we hereby approve your business license, so I can go back to selling tickets myself. All the places that I used to work with before have all been kind of shaken up over the last year. I'm trying to get in touch with Atlas again, but everything they started switching over to doing everything through Airbnb, and that was a mess. I just didn't like the setup they had there. Alrighty. Thank you, Denise. See if any of these emails are angry tech support emails. We got a bunch of those on effing right before Mandy's latest talk, but that just means we got a lot of new people for it. Now, Octavio, they never came, I guess the Lake Michigan one didn't have enough, doesn't show up long enough to be, or taken seriously enough to have a name. Patty, you don't need a license to be a tour guide in Chicago, but if you're going to sell tickets, you need a business license. And that's kind of the trick. Right now I'm under zoning review in progress, which I guess they just means they have to drive by and make sure this residence is real for the home office. Pam, probably. I'm still kind of figuring out the paperwork with so many people on the ticket level of the Patreon right now, but that might be one way of doing it. Yes, there are those that call the Lake Michigan monster. Tim? Thanks, Gina. Gina, your family's club might end up on the Time Travel Pub Crawl this Thursday. David, yeah, Zelle is same email as the PayPal. That works. Thank you. You turn this up a little. That's the wrong button. Thank you, Donna. And Gene, it's a matter of whether I can get enough stuff on it just to get going. I probably should be able to, though. But I kind of made a mistake with this Time Travel Pub Crawl. I booked it to her without giving myself enough time. They take a lot to put together, those ones. Gadleen, it's alright. I mean, especially if you're on the Patreon level for yesterday. You've already paid for your ticket. It's just in the Patreon. Am I doing anything to celebrate Dylan's 80th? Probably. Like a lot of historians, I'm not that big on commemoration. But I just wish he'd announced some new tour dates. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's a good Dylan-related mural tomorrow for Mural Monday. I don't think there is. Mona, there were a couple other mausoleums in Lincoln Park, but they don't appear to have been moved. They appear to have just been torn down and rebuilt elsewhere. Carol, should be both. It depends on which stores want to take it for the Graceland book. But, you know, it will be in stores, in some stores, probably like museum shops and stuff. Online will probably be by far the easiest place to get it, though. That's one of those things that's just not up to the author. Thank you, Bob. Stay cool, that's a good way to put it. Let me go grab Miles. He might not be happy about this. He's enjoying the window. But, Miles. Yeah, okay. Whoa, big guy. Here's Miles. Jan, congrats to your mom. Here's our boy. Here, Miles, say hi to the people. Mary, yeah, I get a percentage of the Cafe Press stuff. It's not huge, but I also don't have to pay any overhead. And he'll be back in a second, I'm sure. Once I hold him up once, he wants to come back every time. See, Miles, you about to hop on the desk?
And down the groove now, we
I hear that.
You'll hear that famous 7 brass of Earl Hines and Bambino.
Yep. Right back on the table, just like that. Right back on the desk. Such a good boy. Yeah, please pass these pets on to Charlotte, but don't pounce on her. Ah, yep, there he is, up the back. We're gonna trim your nails today. Oh yeah, Miles is just the same as he was before he was. Michael, yeah, I know about the case. I also know a guy who's much more of an expert in it. But it's one of those ones that's kind of in my too soon range. Libby, I'm not sure Miles has recovered from my 2-day absence yet. He's not used to that kind of thing anymore. Rebecca, what it takes to open the mausoleums is usually the key. At Graceland, I've been in about half of them.
Tune all done up in a little bit of effervescent jive, bouncing along with the old favorite Catherine Perry to sing a Tisket a Tasket.
Oh yeah, we're just gonna rewind it rather than having to hear anybody but Ella sing a Tisket a Tasket. Thank you, Jenny.
Yes, it is, ladies and gentlemen, Father Hines and his great band playing for you from the new Grand Paris on Chicago's great South Side. Get ready now for...
It's not like Miles was by himself,
Super
but...
Jive in the Father Hines style.
Yes, Miles, I used your name. He can't really do airplane rides as much anymore.
What could this be?
He's too big now.
It's the Limehouse Blues.
Most interesting thing I found inside mausoleums, there's the death mask, a wooden box that nobody was sure what was in there. Not quite big enough to be a coffin, and definitely not built like one. You find a lot of, like, boxes of ashes in mausoleums that are sometimes just kind of stacked up in an uneven pile. Octavio, right. A tisket, a tasket, be embalmed and put in a casket. Miles is back in his window seat. Susan, it's hard to do cemetery night tours. Most of them aren't amenable to doing it. And even if they were, the real trick is they're not really built with lights. So they get really dark in there, and there's a lot of stuff you can trip on. So a few cemeteries have done things like flashlight tours. I've never run one of them. But I've tried to arrange it. When the lockdown started, I tried to talk Graceland into letting me film a nighttime version of the tour. They weren't sure they could get that past the board. Ellen, yeah, coffins, sure. I've never run into a Fisk one. But I do know of one that has a really magnificent sarcophagus in it that you can see. With some tomb snooping.
That's what you call a powerhouse coda. Yeah, Earl Father Hines carries on now and presents Leroy Harris to sing Teacher's Pet.
Well, Donna, I think both of those sleigh and sleighs would be good for the day. But they just mean different things, but I wouldn't want to slay the day in summer in the L-E-I-G-H sense. But you might remember during the winter, the morning mini tours, we slayed the day a couple of times. Ellen, no, I've never been to too many of the overseas ones. I'd love to go out and film Highgate or something, or Highgate or Père Lachaise. I could do virtual tours of those. Why, that's a brilliant idea. Of course, I don't know as much offhand about places like Highgate. I have to really do some research there, because there's a lot of research goes into these cemetery tours. I'm not as much of a London expert, so you'd be more likely to get like a highlights reel. They're going to do one in Memorial Park in Skokie. I think I have enough stories about there. I almost listed that as today's tour, but then I would have had to put together a time travel pub crawl and the new cemetery tour today over the course of 1 week. I've been to so many cemeteries where I have a lot of pictures, but I like to have a bit of video footage while I go. And I wasn't thinking to do that before the shutdowns. I could about do a few in New York. Dean, it depends on the tour, but most of them do take a while, yeah. I gotta do the research, I gotta do the filming, I gotta dig up the articles and stuff. Ooh, no, Kurt, I've never done that one. But I love a good Fisk metallic burial case. Once I did a ghost tour that a couple of the founders of Atlas Obscura came on, along with Caitlin Doty, who does the Ask a Mortician videos. I mentioned Fisk metallic burial case. I heard them in the back of the bus going, yes! Well, Dina, it is. But that's the thing, is I don't want to rush it too much. Yeah, my allergies just kicked my butt yesterday after the tour. I went out and like stocked up on more supplies. Morning, Barb. If anybody's just joining us, the tour was at 10 Central, so now we're in the post-tour hang. But about 10 minutes after we're done with that, the whole thing will be up on the videos section of the Mysterious Chicago Facebook page. It would be a nice day to sit on the porch. Problem is, I don't really want to. Gilbert Cemetery being haunted? I don't know the story well enough.
Have a little Father Hines melody of the Colorado sunset, right?
Good luck, Ava. Ellen, no, I've probably got enough that I could do that one. I just have to find a way to make it, and if I put up a manufacturing tour, I'm afraid everybody would expect their relatives to be on it. Yeah, I thought it was raining last night. I got all excited. I looked out the window. The sidewalks were all wet. It was like splashing like there was rain. Then I kind of realized, how come it's not raining across the street, too? There was a sprinkler on.
Every blade of grass where I roam, whisper as I pass every home. Hand in hand, we'll stand beneath the moon and bid the Colorado sunset good night.
Speaking of Patreons, in a couple of weeks I'll have a big one on Teresa Hollander here. I'll put some stuff on the deep researched here. Wish I could find that picture of her eyeball, but I don't know if that's extant.
Earl Father Hines gives us a bit of jive under the general heading of So Help Me.
Yeah, Dina, I'm digging this too. It's nice to shake it up a bit, and I never get copyright notices on this one, which I just started to on the Benny Goodman. Generally, old-time radio shows are public domain, but if somebody has the publishing rights to one of the songs, then they can get you for that. Kenwood Neighborhood Tour, that's a good idea. I was just thinking Kenwood or Hyde Park would both be good. Mary E. Holland was even involved, the woman Sherlock Holmes that was referred to a lot, was involved in some kind of shootout on 55th Street. Now, Karen, that'd be down in Hyde Park. But alright, I am getting awfully hungry for lunch right now, so once again, upcoming tours. Once again, tomorrow, Mural Monday, I might end up doing at 11 o'clock. Just check the Mysterious Chicago Facebook page. I'll post a bit of a thing about it. So, Thursday night, brand new time travel pub crawl. First of those we've done in a while. Probably just going to be pretty simple drinks. Sunday, a week from today, bringing back Gold Coast Tales, one of the first recent neighborhood tours that I put together. Can't wait to do that one again. And just as a reminder, we'll be on the road seeing Lenora, so no tour Thursday, June 3rd, but watch for a really cool Find a Grave Friday the next morning after that I think will totally make up for it. So, In fact, I might even just make it beyond Find a Grave Friday. Also, just wander around exploring a far-flung cemetery, the furthest one away we have gone. And of course, mini tours daily, usually at 10 a.m. Tomorrow's might be 11, including Mural Monday and Find a Grave Friday. And Fridays at 6:30. Check out Whiskey and a Cookie on the Patty Vasquez Show Facebook page. So until then, everybody, I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago. Thanks a lot for joining me once again, and until tomorrow morning, stay safe, stay strong, I can't say stay warm, because you're gonna have a pretty easy time doing that if you're in Chicago, but stay dry, and of course, stay spooky.